world of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. It's the David Knight Show.
As the clock strikes 13, it's Monday the 25th of May, year of our Lord 2026. Well, over the weekend, we had shots taken at the White House. Now, we're told that it was a crazy guy who thought he was Jesus or the Messiah or whatever. I guess he doesn't like the competition from Trump. But Trump is also taking shots at the White House from Congress. There are signs of little tiny spines growing in some of these people because it has gotten so bad. This in-your-face corruption of this $1776 billion troll, that is taking its toll on senators. And I guess the question is that too far? And we have an excellent clip I'm going to play for you. It's gone viral. Maybe you've seen it, but it's worth seeing it more than once. From a guy in the UK who was attending a Restore rally. This is the party, not Nigel Farage's party of Reform, but another one of Restore. And he nails what is going on throughout civilization right now. It's not just the United States, it's also in the UK, because it is the fourth turning. We'll be right back. Let's take a look at the crime Don, the Don and his mafia family that is there. A freaking disaster is coming, said some senators and congressmen who were in the GOP. Do they just now see this? Combination of bad Trump polling and highly controversial proposals like his so-called slush fund. Yeah, this slush fund is really kind of like the Slough of Despond from Pilgrim's Progress, if you remember that. And this is really kind of the pit for these congressmen and senators. And they're feeling the despond right now. Well, I'm going to come around. If you remember Pilgrim's Progress, he got out of that slough of despond by someone called help. I've got a very simple solution for them. You could do this with a one-sentence bill. You could fix this if they had the will. The question is, are they going to sit around in despair and despond and do nothing? So the slush fund to compensate so-called allies he feels are victimized. It's not about that, folks. Let's understand that even when we look at the Trump opposition, it's very easy for them to fall into this. It's like, wait a minute, you're telling me you're going to give some money to the January 6 people? That was Trump's brilliant strategy as part of this in-your-face open corruption. This is about Trump's $10 billion nonsense lawsuit against the U.S. government that he runs. And let's make it clear, he runs it. It no longer is separate branches. You don't have executive, legislative, and judicial. You've got emergency branch. He does everything that he wishes by declaring an emergency himself, whether one exists or not. And then the emergency branch of government just operates as a dictatorship. It is Trump's government. How can Trump sue himself? Well, he can't. Judge Napolitano pointed that out. Many other people pointed that out. You can't be both the plaintiff and the defendant and then pay yourself with other people's money. That's what Trump is doing. It's just amazing. It's one of the reasons why you don't have people doing that in real life. You don't have the same person suing himself because what would he gain if he won, right? Except for Trump, he can pay himself with your money, with your hard-earned taxes. And so this is finally giving GOP lawmakers the nudge that they need to abandon him and to save their own careers, says Ross Story. But it's not about that. And as I started to say, this inclusion and folding in of January the 6th people was a brilliant move by Trump. He's come up with a $10 billion lawsuit in the past against, I think when he had CBS and ABC, I think it was that initially. He settled for millions of dollars. But he's got a $10 billion lawsuit against Wall Street Journal because they told the truth about his Jeffrey Epstein birthday card. And we saw the card afterwards. First he said, you made all that stuff up. And then they produced the actual card. Then he's got another $10 billion lawsuit against the BBC. His son, Eric, is doing the same thing. going after Jen Psaki. I think she's at MS Now or something, whatever it is. But she talked about his corrupt dealings and said, I'm going to sue you. You said I'm a CEO, I'm on the board or whatever of this organization. Well, he was. I mean, he admitted it himself, and she played the clips where he's there, ringing the bell to open up Wall Street one morning, and they introduced him, and he accepted that, and he's been introduced multiple times that way. And then he says, well, I'm off of that now.
We have that in the deck, that video,
Yes.
if you want me to play it.
Yes. Yeah, let's go ahead and play that. We might as well do it now. Here we are.
Line to file your case.
Call 800-741-2368.
I didn't edit this. This is a raw clip I just grabbed here. Here's where it starts.
Today, the adult son of the President of the United States, Eric Trump, came
Chip off the
after
old
us on
block.
social media and accused us of lying. You see, on Wednesday, we covered this story from the Financial Times, which reported that an AI company with ties to the Trump family crypto business was chasing a deal with a Chinese chip-making company that members of Congress have warned is connected to the Chinese Communist Party. Specifically, Eric took issue with us describing him as a member of the board of that AI company, a company called Alt-5 Sigma. And in his tweet today, Eric says he has never, in all caps I would note, been on the board of Alt-5. Not now, not ever, which is a little confusing.
Yeah, watch this.
That this is
They
how
bring
he
the
was
receipts.
introduced at the NASDAQ just last summer when Alt-5 rang the opening bell.
It is my great pleasure to welcome Alt-5 board member Eric Trump. Now, please join me in welcoming Alt-5 Sigma's chairman, Zach Witkoff, and director Eric Trump to the podium for further remarks.
Witkoff and Trump.
I now want to welcome fellow board member and World Liberty co-founder Eric Trump to the stage to make a few remarks.
Now, to be as fair as possible to Eric, I should say that his role at Alt-5 is at the very least been complicated. We do know that he's not currently a director on the board.
Like Hunter and Burisma.
The company initially announced that he was becoming a director on Alt-5's board of directors. Likewise, a company filing with the SEC said he was being appointed as a director on the board. And the company's website also listed him as a director on their leadership page. And then that situation changed, because in subsequent filings with the SEC, Eric was designated as an observer on the board, a role that typically means you cannot cast a vote at board meetings, but you are able to attend them. And here's the thing.
So here's the thing. Bottom line is, he said, I never was a part of this. Of course, he was. He was introduced that way. They put it on the website. They put it on their SEC filings and so forth. Now, maybe he's like Hunter, and Burisma, this guy who was brought in presumably because, I don't know, was he an expert on oil? Was Hunter an expert on oil? I think he was an expert on some other substances that he used all the time. The same thing is true of Eric Trump. Does he know anything about crypto? No. He knows people who can give him money for helping crypto. And that's what we're looking at here, folks. We're looking at Biden crime family level corruption. Focus on that, MAGA. Come on. You called it out when it happened with the Bidens. Call it out when it happens with Trump. Let's be honest about this. The guy is worse, more in your face than even Joe Biden. They tried to cover it up. Trump doesn't cover it up. He does it right to your face. And this is one of the reasons why the Republicans are looking at this like, man, we can't explain this away. We're going to, if we live by the Trump lies, we're going to die by the Trump lies. And so lawmakers last week did several things. First of all, they pushed back against his grand schemes of a ballroom that have now gone from $200 million to $300 million to $400 million, then jumped, and that's all going to be privately funded, jumped to $1 billion and said, now we're going to put it on the taxpayers. So they pushed back against that. They have talked about a resolution to force Trump to end the Iraq War. See, this is an awkward situation that Congress is in. Congress is supposed to declare war because they abdicated that power to Trump. Now they have to ask him to end the war that they let him start. I mean, we're in such a strange area. And of course, you've got Mark Levin and you've got Ted Cruz out there holding signs in a meme here. Not Ted Cruz, but Mark Levin and Lindsey Graham. There they are in front of the White House. Don't stop the war. Don't stop the war. This is from the Babylon BB Mark Levin and Lindsey Graham lead a passionate protest. Do not stop the war. And we've seen this over and over again. Lindsey Graham, he cheers Trump on, thinks this is great. He starts the war. But if Trump ever talks about peace, well, Congress is going to have to say something about that. So, no, Lindsey, actually, we've all read the Constitution even, and I imagine maybe you did once. It says Congress will declare war, not that Congress will declare peace. And so you didn't, you skipped first base. And so even though you think you're running to home plate, you're out. You're out as far as the Constitution is concerned. So they abruptly canceled a vote on a $72 billion additional funding for ICE as well. So from ICE to pushing back against the war to pushing back against his ballroom, and now they're really upset by the end of the week because of all of this slush fund that he's got. Trump's approval ratings have fallen to 37% in a New York Times poll, the lowest of his 2 terms combined. Gas prices were averaging roughly $4.50 a gallon nationwide. That's become a constant reminder. They campaigned on the fact that under Biden and his misapplication of U.S. power in terms of sanctions, that gas got up to $5.02 a gallon average. They're rapidly approaching that. We should be there in a month or less. A freaking disaster is coming, said one House Republican. Again, unless Israel can rig this election, as they did with Massey. The problem is, certainly you can pour in record amounts of money against one congressman. And as Kim Iverson pointed out, she said, here's another way that you could rig that election if the Israelis wanted to. It wouldn't be that difficult. You look at the margin of voting was really pretty small. It was only about 10,000. They had a lot of vote by mail stuff. As I played last week, Donald Trump is now telling people the truth about vote by mail, even though he was the one who set that precedent. He says if you're going to have vote by mail elections where everybody votes by mail, it's not saying that people who are sick or people who are gone, people who are in the military can't vote by mail. That's always been the case. But if you're going to have everybody vote by mail, if you're going to have a large portion of everybody voting by mail, it's so easy to corrupt it. And we said this, I said it, many other people said it in 2020. And Trump did it anyway to sell the pandemic. And maybe it was the intention to go from Trump to Biden back to Trump again. Left, right, march of tyranny, setting these precedents. But Trump now thinks that it is so vital, he's got to pass his Save America Act to stop the things that he did in 2020 to corrupt our elections, vote by mail. And you go back and look at it. What did he call his grift that he was doing along with Alex Jones? He called it the Save America PAC, right? He made $250 million after the election. He got more donations after the election than he did before the election. And of course, Alex Jones is making millions off of the Stop the Steal stuff. I called it a grift. I got fired within a couple of days because of that. And it was a grift. And this is a unbelievable grift that is there. But now we're supposed to believe that the dividing line for somebody who's a rhino and somebody who's not a rhino, in other words, somebody who follows Trump because Trump is the Republican Party, then that dividing line is now his Save America Act. You got to vote for that or you're a rhino. You got to vote for that or you're a bad guy. Well, this is a reaction to trying to fix something that Trump broke. It's like the Strait of Hormuz. It's like, hey, the Strait of Hormuz was doing fine before you broke it. The elections in terms of vote by mail, we didn't have that until Trump put that in. Again, he's always positioning himself as a hero to put out the fire that he started. So a disaster is coming because of this $1.8 billion slush fund, cynically named the $1.776 billion fund, right? 1776, you get it? Okay. This week,
what if I stole money from you in a patriotic amount so that the total sounds very American?
Patriotic theft. Yeah, that's right. 1776. Yeah, we the people, right? Give me your money or give me death. That's it. Anyway, this week they said enough. I can't imagine any Republican ever allowing money to be paid to anyone who harmed law enforcement, said a former Trump administration official. Well, again, this is the genius of selling this to the MAGA crowd. If he would have made it about his income tax returns and the $100 million that he will save because he won't be audited on all the tax cheating that he's done up to this point. From here on out, what'll happen? I don't know. I'm sure he's got something in the works for that as well. But that alone makes $100 million for him. The $10 billion lawsuit that this $1.776 billion settlement is really about, that $10 billion lawsuit was all about stuff that was done to Donald Trump. It wasn't about anything done to the January 6 people. Donald Trump left the J6 people twisting in the wind with their necks in a noose. That's what he did when he left in January 2021. He could have pardoned them. And I've said this many, many times. All these Democrats are out there. This is an insurrection. This is an insurrection. Yeah, an insurrection without guns. But, you know, the Insurrection Act that they're going after was actually passed by Congress to take revenge on the Confederate veterans after the Civil War. And the president, Andrew Johnson, who took over after Abraham Lincoln, said, enough, we're not going to reflame the Civil War by coming after these people and trying to throw them in jail after the war. We've had enough. We're sick of a Civil War. So what he did to keep the Civil War from being reignited, as Congress wanted revenge, what he did was he pardoned every single one of the Confederate soldiers who they said had been involved in an insurrection. Well, that was never the Confederate position at all. They always believed, and I think rightfully so, that the insurrection was on the side of the feds. It was the feds who conducted an insurrection against the Constitution, a government that was founded on the right of secession. That's what we're celebrating on 4th of July. That when government becomes destructive of our rights, it is the right and the duty of the people to alter or abolish it, or to just leave it as the founders did, as founders left Great Britain. And that was their position. They didn't see it as an insurrection. But wisely, he pardoned all of them. As I pointed out, you had Gerald Ford, who pardoned Richard Nixon before they made charges against him. So you don't have to be charged in order to be pardoned. People can just see where this is headed and they can head it off. And of course, Biden did that for his family of crime, his crime syndicate family. He did it for Fauci and all the rest of this stuff. So you can pardon people in advance. Now, you know, and when people are pushing back against this Fauci pardon, they're not saying you can't pardon somebody before they're indicted for something. What they're saying is, this wasn't done by you. This was done with somebody who had an auto pen. So that doesn't really have any effect. Well, you know, that's an argument they can have. But the bottom line is Trump left these people twisting in the wind. He did nothing for them. Why? Because of his own personal calculus. He looked at it and said, well, I'm really going to set the other side on fire and they're going to come after me if I pardon them. Well, guess what? They came after him anyway. And so part of his comeback was to pardon these people. Now they're making this slush fund corruption about the J6 people again. You know, all the stuff about Trump saying, well, they're only coming after me because I'm between you and them. What a lie. They're coming after the J6 people again because they're between the Democrats and Trump again. He keeps pushing them out in front to take the hits for him. That's what he keeps doing. So, again, GOP lawmakers cited Trump's erratic governance as justification for the rebellion. They just now noticed. They didn't notice last year with all the tariffs and everything. Wall Street noticed. Everybody was talking about Taco. Trump always chickens out on his tariffs. You know, depending on what he had for dinner last night, whether he's up all night with indigestion or not, you can see him dropping 100% tariffs on a country or something, just threatening them because somebody said something about him that he didn't like. So I'm going to punish all of Canada. This is what we're seeing from Trump forever. So why is this anything new? One House Republican criticized what he described as flip-flopping on Iran negotiations from one Truth Social post to another, treating Taiwan like a bargaining chip. nothing has changed except it's gotten to the point where they finally have to do something. He's pushing it too far. The list goes on and on. And I think this is going to be the moment, the slush fund that he has set up is going to be the moment where he jumped the shark, right? That was the end of Happy Days when they had Fonzie's water skiing and he jumped the shark. It got so ridiculous, it got canceled. Well, it's time to cancel the Trump reality show because there's no reality to it. A second House Republican told MSN Now that Republicans feel more confident in criticizing him because the poll numbers aren't as high as they were. And they said if we had a Memorial Day wish, it would be to exit the Iran war entirely. And the sooner the better, quite frankly. In many ways, I don't think that the GOP lawmakers fear the president anymore, said one person. Many have realized you can outlive Trump, politically speaking. Well, actually speaking as well. He's not in great health and he's pretty elderly as well. But there's one person who has not changed, who'll always be fearful, and that's Mike Johnson, who loves his post so much. He's so afraid of losing the speakership that he's going to lose the speakership. So he puts this out. President Trump is the only one who could have gotten Iran, the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism, there we go, that's that Zionist line, to the negotiating table. We are greatly encouraged to learn a peace deal is underway in Iran. Look forward to learning more about the specifics. That's his favorite line. When anybody asks Mike Johnson a question, well, I don't know specifically about that. I haven't seen that, but so I can't really speak to that. So here he is. There's a peace deal, and I love it. Although I haven't seen it, I don't know anything about it. Mike Johnson, that should be his epithet on his tombstone there, his political tombstone. Under President Trump's leadership, our nation is stronger, more respected on the global stage. Are you serious? Can you imagine somebody saying this? And safer than ever before. And then I love the community note that was added to this. The readers added context they thought might be important. Obama and other world leaders have been able to get Iran to the negotiation table. As a matter of fact, one guy put up, and I'm going to go into it, he put up a long list of people who've gotten, it's not just Obama, but it's many, many, many others have gotten Iran to the negotiating table. Here's the problem. What Trump is doing is following the Israeli policy is that you get them to the negotiating table so that you can, A, do a sneak attack on their country while you're negotiating with them, or B, assassinate them. And they have tried both of these things. They've done one, they tried to assassinate them. So that was told by the Pakistanis that said, we want them to get out of here. They're going to kill you as you show up for these peace negotiations. But then, of course, whatever agreement you come to, you violate it. That's the third tenet, right? First of all, you get them to come, so you got a shot at killing them. Secondly, while you're negotiating, you can attack their country. And third, if you agree to a ceasefire, you don't follow that anyway, and yet you say that the ceasefire is still in effect. Trump is doing that now, even though there is shooting, taking over of, you've got missiles being exchanged back and forth, ships being attacked, ships being taken over. Trump says, the ceasefire is still in effect. Yeah, that's the way Israel sees ceasefires that are there.
It's a ceasefire for thee, not for me.
That's right. Here's one person's response to it, to Mike Johnson. You are an idiot. That's sufficient, I think. Iraq killed the school kids to stop pushing debunked lies. We lost no bases. Stop peddling Iraqi TV lies and propaganda. Now, this is a person who is saying he's doing this in response to the person who put this up. And they criticized Mike Johnson for saying that. So he says, you, not Mike Johnson, but he said to the other person, you are an idiot. And then notice what he said. Iraq killed the school kids. Why is he talking about Iraq? Because this idiot MAGA tard doesn't know the difference between Iraq and Iran. He does. And again, this is the line that the Trump administration went with initially. So if Donald Trump said that Iran used Tomahawk missiles against the school on day one, well, then that's what happened. They had this all set up. They weren't expecting it. They were negotiating, and they weren't expecting an attack. So that in and of itself was questionable. But on day one, people like Scott Ritter, they had video of the missiles coming in. You could clearly see that it was a Tomahawk missile. For 2 months, Trump and the Pentagon lied about the picture that you saw. Eventually, they admitted that it was a Tomahawk missile, but people like Scott Ritter said, no. Iran doesn't have any Tomahawk missiles. We don't even give Tomahawk missiles to Israel. They are kept very closely. They're not sold to each and every ally even, certainly not to our enemies. And he said, and here's what they actually did. They sent in several of them, and they've got one that stays up high as an observer. And that was the double tap strike. It stays up high so they can see people moving around and reacting to the initial strike. And then they can send it in for greater damage and higher casualties, as Pete Hegseth says, lethality. It's all about the number of people that we kill and the number of bombs that we drop. That's how we win wars, isn't it? That's how we won Vietnam, right? That's how we won all these wars. No, that strategy has never worked. It's not a strategy at all. And it is their PR tactic that they use to sell their wars and keep the wars going. But the worst aspect of it, and this is what Scott Ritter was talking about on day one, he said, first of all, Pete Hegseth eviscerated this group that double checks the targeting to get it right. He said that was what he did. He got it wrong one time, and it killed a bunch of civilians, and he choked up talking about it. He said, I think about that every day, Scott Ritter said. Where's the conscience of people like Pete Hegseth? Seared with a hot iron. Let me tell you, that's where his conscience is. Doesn't have one that's functioning anymore. And so Scott Ritter talked about that. And we've had people who were CIA analysts and said, look, they had eyes on this. They knew exactly what was happening. Scott Ritter said they take that last one, and it's the second or third one, they use it to observe. And then when they see everybody milling around, that one goes down. And not only does it explode, but it ignites its fuel into a firebomb to maximize casualties. That's what they did to school kids. So this idiot says, you are an idiot. Iraq killed the school kids. He doesn't even know what country this war is being fought in. That's how ignorant Ricky is Bruin Ricky 64 on Twitter. This guy is unbelievable. He got a lot of responses. And so it's, stop pushing these debunked lies. Well, the lies that have been debunked are the ones that were told by Trump, Hegseth, and the Pentagon. Even the Pentagon has backtracked and said, well, now this is what happened. You'll never see a politician like Mike Johnson or Donald Trump backtrack and tell you the truth and contradict themselves. So again, I said, in many ways, I don't think the GOP lawmakers fear the president anymore. What's the old saying? When the government fears the people, there is liberty. That's what the founders told us. When the people or Congress fear the tyrant, there is tyranny. And that's what we have in Washington right now. So then Ted Cruz had a big weekend. He started off on his podcast. He does a once-a-week podcast. And he said the GOP senators were screaming at Todd Blanche, the attorney general right now, who is formerly Trump's personal lawyer. And I would say even as attorney general at the Department of Justice, he is still Trump's personal lawyer. He does not represent the American government, the American people, or the Constitution. He is Trump's personal lawyer. And so they were screaming at him. Well, I got to say to Ted Cruz and the senators, you impeach this attorney general. Impeach him or shut up. We're sick and tired of the dog and pony shows that you guys do. I'm sure they'll bring him in and ask him some questions in a hearing and then do nothing at all about it. They won't even remove him, let alone punish him for this kind of corruption. Again, the canary in the Trump coal mine is now Ted Cruz. And it makes you almost wonder, doesn't it, that maybe this is about Trump wanting to get out of this Zionist trap. They would send in their attack dog, Ted Cruz, to attack him. If Trump sees how bad this Iran war is working out for him, politically, economically, in terms of global leadership, everything, it is a total disaster. If he wants to get out and generally get out. Of course, he's going to have a lot of resistance from Bibi Netanyahu and all the people that he controls, like Ted Cruz. Never forget that Ted Cruz has said over and over again that he had one thing that he wanted to get across. He said, I want to make sure.
I came into Congress 13 years ago with the stated intention of being the leading defender of Israel in the United States Senate. Great. And I've worked every day to do that.
How about that? Yeah, that was his goal. He wasn't here to help Americans. He wasn't here to make sure that we return to the Constitution in some form or the other. No, he was there to represent Israel. And he says this to people. Why would anybody pay attention to Ted Cruz? So when it's coming from somebody like that, forgive me if I see some perhaps alternative motives of why he is attacking Trump. Not because he's fearless, but maybe because he fears Israel more than he fears Trump. So on his podcast, he said, it was one of the roughest meetings I've seen in my entire time in the Senate. Fiery does not begin to cut it. My guess is there's probably 45 senators in the room, and at least half of them were blasting the attorney general. They were pissed, he said. Well, again, it is the most open corruption that any of us have seen. Think about the fact that out of 45 senators in the room, only half of them were upset and screaming about it. That's the amazing. The dog that didn't bark. Well, how about the senators who didn't scream about this? What's the matter with them? And so he said, I couldn't defend the fund because it appeared as though Trump was cutting a deal with himself. It appeared like he was cutting a deal with himself. He was cutting a deal with himself. That's why it looked like it. Sometimes you got to trust your eyes, right? Yeah, don't believe what you're seeing there. That's not really happening. He said there are multiple senators yelling at the attorney general saying, this feels like self-dealing. They were screaming at the acting attorney general. He was trying to lay out a legal basis. Cruz added, well, the legal basis, he says, is quite sound. No, it isn't. You can't be both plaintiff and defendant in a lawsuit. That makes absolutely no sense. This is Ted Cruz. He's a graduate of Harvard Law School. As a matter of fact, he was one of the editors of the Harvard Law Review. Maybe this tells us something about Harvard, if we didn't know it already, about Alan Dershowitz, who was a professor there for a long time. Is Ted Cruz a lawyer or is he a liar? Well, I think we know. So again, he says, the legal basis for it is quite sound. Well, then, Ted, you have to change the law. If this is any way, shape, or form legal, you need to change the law, and you need to do it immediately. Instead, they're going to just sit around. They're not going to impeach Todd Blanche for being corrupt. They're not going to change the law. They're not going to do any of that stuff. Cruz said on his podcast, if the Senate had gone forward with planned series of votes pertaining to ICE bill Thursday night, that roughly half the Republican caucus would have voted with Democrats in favor of amending, seeking to rein in the funds. Well, again, the issue is they cancel that vote because just like we saw with the Massey election, the powers that be cannot ever be seen to lose something. This has always been the attitude, really, of the National Rifle Association. They will compromise when it looks like they're going to lose on an issue. They'll compromise so they can always say, well, we won, right? We agree this is a better outcome, and they'll find a way to spin it, right? But they will not drive the stake in the ground to support the Second Amendment. Gun Owners of America will, and there's other gun associations that will do that. But the NRA wants to always be seen to be on the winning side. And that's the same issue with this as well. Cruz warned that if the administration doesn't modify the anti-weaponization fund, that's what they're calling it, he says, then they're going to have a full-on revolt in the Senate. Well, you got to ask yourself, what does it finally take? Tom Tillis, North Carolina, called the fund a payout pot for punks, referring to the January 6 people. Again, Tom Tillis is a globalist, if ever there was one. He was put ahead of real conservatives who had been in the minority in the state Senate when he got elected to the state legislature, he leapfrogged everybody else. And I thought, well, this is really strange. Where'd this guy come from? And then they move him on to become senator. But while he was there in the House, as the Republicans got the majority for the first time ever since Reconstruction, what he did, one of the first things he did was to run through toll roads to profit foreign corporations. And they liked that so much, they made him a senator. And so now he is casting this thing, again, as a payout for punks. I really don't think the J6 people are going to get any money out of this. I think they will, it'll be like I said, the CARES Act, where the vast majority of the money that was supposed to go to small businesses went to big businesses like Trump. Trump even changed the definition of what a small business was so they could take all the money, and they took more than half of the money went to less than 5% of the businesses that applied. So
Tom Tillis opposing this really smacks of the whole thing that the left has done to Trump to inoculate him against everything. You know, they come after him in such a way that it does make it look as though he's between the people and
that's right,
the tyranny by, attacking the people and then referencing it to, Trump's big slush fund. Like, he could go after this in a logical way, but instead he goes after the one angle of it that is heavily partisan.
That's right. That's right. And so they always focus on that. And, quite frankly, when you look at the weaponization against Trump, and there was weaponization against him, and I said this as he took office, I said, the right thing for him to do would be to enact some reforms to make sure that never happened again. And yet I said he won't do that. What he will do is he will help to establish that precedent of weaponization of government, because he will do it on steroids to his enemies to show that he personally is powerful. He doesn't want to have an honest government. He wants to have personal power, and that's what this is really about. So you've got a bipartisan bill that has been introduced in the House from a Democrat and a Republican. The Republican is Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania. The Democrat is from New York, Tom Suozzi. They introduced bipartisan legislation aimed at prohibiting federal money from being used by the Anti-Weaponization Fund. So I guess my question, I haven't seen the bill, but is this going to be very narrowly defined to this particular thing that Trump is doing? I can fix this real simply for them. Like I said at the top of the show, I can give them one sentence to fix this. Trump is out there saying, I could have settled my case. I could have settled it for an absolute fortune. Instead, I'm helping others who are so badly abused. You see, he's making this about the little guy. You think he cares about the little guy when he left them twisting in the wind to be persecuted for 4 years, many of them in jail under horrific circumstances for that amount of time. And a lot of people who did nothing violent getting caught up in this. Then Trump does, after 4 or 5 years of the suffering from these people, he finally does a pardon for them and pats himself on the back. Well, here's how you fix this. Again, instead of Pilgrim's Progress and the Slough of Despond, we have the MAGA Congress, not Pilgrim's Progress. And we've got the Slush Fund instead of the Slough of Despond. We have the Slush of Despond, causing these politicians to despond of their evaporating political career. I should say not evaporating, but sinking into the swamp. As a matter of fact, it's very much an appropriate metaphor. That's what Pilgrim's Progress always was about. And so what we see here is the GOP sinking in the swamp under the burden of their sins of abdication in the face of tyranny and war by executive order. Yeah, because in the original Pilgrim's Progress, he's on his journey. He gets into the swamp, and he is sinking in the swamp under the burden of his sins. And this is these people are sinking under the burden of carrying Trump on their back, no matter what sins he commits. That is what we're really looking at. And everybody sees this. Look at this headline from Rolling Stone. Not headline, but the cover of Rolling Stone. The most corrupt president ever. Ever. How about that? I said this long before Rolling Stone ever put that up there, and it absolutely is true. I believe that. Everybody is saying it now. The fund is rife with legal and ethical questions, say legal experts. Of course, Ted Cruz doesn't even talk about the ethics involved in this. And as a Harvard Review law school graduate, he doesn't see any legal issues with this either. Again, he is blinded with all the slop that's in his eyes from the swamp. Trump and the DOJ of his is pushed to voluntarily dismiss a lawsuit from the president seeking $10 billion of the leaking of his tax returns. Again, that was what it was about. It was about that and the fact that they raided Mar-a-Lago. Guess what? They didn't go into Mar-a-Lago throwing flash grenades like they do to people in the inner city over the drug war nonsense, and many times the wrong house. It wasn't a no-knock raid, but how dare them show up at his palace and actually walk in and look at his stuff? Oh, I want $10 billion for that. He wanted $10 billion for that and for the tax return stuff. And the tax returns, as I pointed out last week, it was a contractor who was working for the IRS. He wanted to expose the fact that there were so many wealthy people, some of the wealthiest people, people like Donald Trump and Michael Bloomberg and George Soros, even these people on the left like that, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. Look, these people don't pay taxes. They pay very little in taxes if they pay at all. As a matter of fact, George Soros had not paid taxes in 3 years. 0 taxes he paid. And so this guy wanted to expose them. And that's what Trump was fundamentally suing over. And it was not targeted towards him. No other billionaire or rich person that was exposed in any of that, embarrassed, assuming that they get embarrassed. Trump was not embarrassed when people said, you don't pay taxes. And he said, well, I think that's smart. I hire people and pay them a lot of money to make sure that I don't pay taxes. Remember that? He said that publicly in a debate. So if his position is that he doesn't pay taxes because he's smarter than you, he doesn't pay taxes because he's richer than you, then why would he sue the contractor sue the IRS because they had a contractor who stole the data and published it showing that he doesn't pay taxes? Doesn't that just prove how smart Trump is? No, what proves how smart Trump is that he can put this on as if this is going back to J6, making it all about them versus us, this kind of Civil War tribalism, the kind of tribalism that they want to feed to get us into a civil war. That's his really smart thing that he's doing. The corrupt thing that he's doing is to give this money to himself and to pull in his personal lawyer, Todd Blanche. This guy is no better than his Cohen lawyer that was working for him a long time. So again, the next day, Todd Blanche signed a memo blocking the IRS from taking any action against Trump with regard to his past tax returns. He's now audit-proof. It comes after years of scrutiny around whether the president dodged tax payments up to, listen to this, $100 million in IRS back payments. That's what this slush fund is about. It's about Donald Trump and the IRS. Don't make it about J6. It's not about that. And it's not weaponization of government for a billionaire to have to pay taxes. Oh, how dare you come after me for taxes, right? All these other billionaires don't pay taxes. I shouldn't have to pay taxes either. The incredibly collusive nature of the settlement makes it problematic and should be of concern to every American, said one person who was reviewing the documents and a former director of the torts branch of the Department of Justice's Civil Division reviewing that. Again, this is the person who handled lawsuits for the Department of Justice. He is the party that is requesting the settlement. He is also the party that is making the offer and compromise. That is unprecedented. That's exactly what Judge Napolitano said last week. He said you can't be both plaintiff and defendant. That doesn't make any sense. This guy says that's unheard of. And it raises all sorts of concerns about whether or not this is a sham litigation that was filed purely for the purposes of skimming money. Bingo. That's exactly what it is. And so here's the very simple fix, if the Congress would do it. You might want to cut this out and send it to your congressman. It takes one line, and it simply says that a sitting president cannot sue the government. End of story. And think about how easy this would be for people to understand and to get behind, because we have a situation where, and Trump has pointed this out, well, you got to remove me from office before you can come after me for crimes, right? That's what the whole impeachment process is about. Congress impeaches the president if they think a crime has been committed and that is actionable, right? High crimes and misdemeanors. So they impeach him. That's an indictment. Then there is a trial in the Senate. And if the Senate agrees and finds him guilty, then he is removed from office. Then and only then can somebody come after him for a crime. In other words, if he wanted to, as he's given the illustration, if he wanted to go down Fifth Avenue and get out of his Secret Service limousine and take one of the Secret Service pistols and shoot somebody in the head on Fifth Avenue, well, he could do that as president. The rightful response would, they can't try him for murder as a president, right? Presidents murder people all the time. They get really good at it, right? And so they couldn't try him for murder, but what they could do is they could impeach him. They could try him in the Senate. If they found him guilty, they could remove him from office. Then they could go after him for murder. That's the way this works. So if he's got a lawsuit, this is the way it ought to work. If something is done by the government against you as president, you cannot, as president, sue. You wait until you are out of office, until you are a private party, until you are not the one running the government, until you're not the one that the Department of Justice answers to, the people who are going to be fighting the lawsuit, making compromises. You wait until after that is all over, then you can sue the government and try to make your case. And by the way, he doesn't have a case. He doesn't have a case any more than he has a case against the Wall Street Journal and the BBC for $10 billion each.
Hence why he doesn't want to wait.
Yeah, that's right. So again, maybe we should make this case. Trump, you should pass the law saying that a sitting president cannot sue the government, but say, because you think that you've got a case for $10 billion, President Trump, you should resign so that you can sue the government and win your case. And that'd be one way to get him to go. Just dangle a bunch of money out there like a donkey with a carrot on a stick in front of him. Any effort to halt this can and should come from Congress, which can definitively and easily do this. That's right. Just one sentence. Nobody is saying this. What does it take? I mean, is that rocket science to say you just put in a one-sentence bill and say, no president can sue the government while he is president? End of story. It's just that simple. It'd be very easy, I think, to sell that, to get people to understand it. Legal issues over the settlement were raised before it was announced, with a judge overseeing the matter questioning Trump and the Justice Department over whether they were truly adversaries, which is a requirement for bringing cases to court. And this is what Judge Napolitano pointed out. This is a lawsuit that was brought by Trump against his own government. So don't allow that to happen. That's what you put in. That ends Trump from doing this. It ends anybody else from doing it. This is a very easy one to fix. So it is a sham lawsuit, and it has the appearance that, said one person, I don't really have a readily available precedent because people don't do things like this. People don't sue themselves. Because if you sued yourself, you would have to pay yourself if you lost, except as president, he can get you to pay him when he loses or wins. Which one is it? I don't know if he won or lost. He's both plaintiff and defendant. So yeah. Did he win or lose? Yes. So Trump on Friday defended it. However, he's doubling down. He says he gave up a lot of money in a case that he speculated he would have won a fortune. So tell him, okay, we're going to pass this law. Now you can resign and you can collect your fortune because it's a slam dunk according to you, right? He said, instead, I am helping others. He is so selfless, isn't he? I mean, I've never seen a more selfless billionaire. Yeah. Legal issues over the settlement were raised long before it was brought up, as many people pointed out. Well, I think the case that Trump filed was very, very weak and unlikely to prevail, said one of the people who was formerly with the Department of Justice's tort division. And so, again, he is just like Eric. They throw out these frivolous lawsuits for massive amounts of money to intimidate people. And of course, they have massive amounts of money they can hire lawyers to intimidate you with as well. Melania threatening to sue anybody that said that she knew Jeffrey Epstein or that they were introduced. And of course, that is a lawsuit that is going on right now with Michael Wolff, and it'll be interesting to see the discovery. Many times, Michael Wolff has reported this, and as I pointed out, other people would repeat what Michael Wolff had said, that it was he was told by Jeffrey Epstein that Jeffrey Epstein had introduced Melania to Donald Trump, and she was something of a secondhand girlfriend, to put it politely. And so she said, I'm going to sue over that to all the people who repeated what Michael Wolff said, which I thought was kind of strange. She was threatening multi-billion-dollar lawsuits against big media organizations that would repeat the allegations that were made by Michael Wolff. And yet she wasn't suing Michael Wolff. Well, then she threatened to sue Michael Wolff, and Michael Wolff said, no, I'm suing you. And so that's where that is right now. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I would think that a journalist would record any interview like that they had with somebody. I would expect that he would have the tapes. Maybe he doesn't. I don't know. He never said, I've got it on tape. So we'll see if he's got it on tape. The complete lack of any identified criteria for how they're going to determine eligibility, how they're going to determine how much compensation somebody gets, how they're going to determine who was injured, and in what way is entirely unprecedented. And again, this is another part of the corruption. This is all going to be determined by a group of people, a committee. Trump is going to appoint the people. They will report to him and to him alone. He'll be able to remove anybody that he doesn't like. The whole thing is a closed process. It just reeks of corruption, unlike anything we've seen before, even with Trump. It also says the government cannot be held liable for any other fraud or misuse of the funds. So they're going to try to give themselves immunity for fraud in advance. You know, Trump would not give immunity to the January 6 people, but he's going to give himself immunity from fraud for this because he knows he's committing fraud. One person said, well, the next administration, if it's a Democrat one, is going to do everything they can to claw this money back, to publicize who the recipients were, to review the applications, and you better believe that if some of these people, if the fund goes through, who say that those people will be prosecuted in the next administration because they lied and defrauded the government. So
not
when you
so
look
sure about this. I kind of feel like it's going to be the sort of thing of, well, hey, the Republicans are allowed to loot the government.
Yeah.
However,
Let's leave that in place and we'll do it for ourselves. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's going to be, well, now it's our turn.
Yeah, that's right. What's the point of becoming president if you can't do stuff like this, right? And here's the other thing, too.
The Hill's going to be like, oh, well, if it's a Democrat, they're going to turn all this around. They're going to stop there's going to be blockchain watermark ballots.
That's right. The whole thing was a sting. See, we set this up to trap the Democrats. Wheel Steve Pachinik out with Alex to sell that stuff. But when you look at this, when you say, I'm going to give people compensation for having been unfairly targeted for the government, wouldn't you want to publicize that? Why would you want to keep it secret? Unless it's going to be corrupt. I say this about everything. The national security state that was brought in predominantly by Truman after World War II, where they make everything a secret. It's about keeping themselves secure. It's not about keeping the nation secure. Certainly is not about our safety. It's about making sure that they have set up a secret black box government. We're not allowed to see the workings on the inside. Everything is opaque. Nothing is transparent. It's not even translucent. But you can kind of figure out what it's doing. You know, you can reverse engineer a black box if you very carefully look at the inputs and the outputs. And that's what we can all do. We can look at what is going into this thing and that's coming out, and we can pretty much tell you what's going on the inside. We don't need to open it up and look at the actual chip components, right? We know what this black box is doing functionally.
And
so,
let's not forget, this is the man that bragged about how smart he is by holding up the fact that he's dodged taxes.
Yeah.
He's just given himself the right to commit fraud. If he thinks that, tax evasion is a sign of intelligence, how intelligent would it be to, commit fraud with legal immunity?
That's right. Well, of course, again, everybody talks about the difference between tax evasion and tax avoidance. Tax avoidance is using the tax code to avoid paying taxes, and that's legal. That's what the billionaires do. They write the code, and they use the code to avoid paying any taxes. Tax evasion is just when you lie about it or whatever, and you do whatever you want, and that is really looks like that's what Trump knows he was doing, was tax evasion, not avoidance. It is effectively a self-pardon for Trump on his past tax dealings. Why would you need that? Again, everybody would say, why did Hunter Biden need to be pardoned for 14 years or whatever it was, right? Or maybe it's back to 2014. I don't remember. But the bottom line is because it's kind of an admission of guilt, isn't it? Well, this is an admission of guilt from Donald Trump of tax evasion. The courts are not going to get us out of this one. This is one where Congress needs to step up, do a job, and protect its constitutional power of the purse. You mean like they didn't do with the tariffs? You mean like they didn't do with the wars? You think they're going to grow a spine? Frankly, I don't think that's going to happen. And so then we have, this is one last thing I want to say about this. We'll move on to another topic. We have Byron Donalds, who's a congressman from Florida. And he is not only, this is a guy who is MAGA extraordinaire. He will humiliate himself even more so than Mike Johnson. And so he comes out yesterday defending the Justice Department's controversial fund, saying, well, everybody is just losing their mind. Not Byron Donalds, right? He's not losing his mind. He's just losing his credibility and his ethics and any understanding of the law. The Obama administration, he said, after the IRS has been sued multiple times, the Obama administration settled with groups. Yeah, but these are groups who were suing the Department of Justice because of what the IRS had done politically. And that was a weaponization against different groups. Remember, they denied them tax-exempt status because they didn't like who they were or didn't like their politics or whatever. So they sued the Department of Justice, and people sue the Department of Justice all the time over misdeeds that are done by the government. That's a very different thing. Obama did not sue the government himself and then say, well, I think I have a really good case, so send me the money. That's what we're talking about here. Byron Donalds has completely lost it here. He says, the acting attorney general is telling everybody that it's not partisan. So therefore, it's not partisan. I mean, just believe it. So that's what we got. We got his word that this is not partisan. He said, anybody who is victimized by a government for political purposes has a right to sue. Well, that's right. And but it doesn't work like this. Not at all. And so again, this is what it really looks like. This is what, folks, a MAGA marriage actually looks like. And if I can find it, let's see, where is that? I've got this written down wrong. Let's see. Yeah, thank you.
Charlie!
What?
What are you doing?
Where?
There, with her.
Who?
Her. How could you?
What?
She caught him in bed with another woman.
That.
Where?
What?
When I came in, you and she.
Who?
You know very well who. That woman there.
Where?
Charlie.
What?
You and that woman.
What woman?
The one who just left.
When?
But Charlie,
What?
aren't you even ashamed of yourself?
Why?
Because of...
The bed's all made up. Where'd she go? This is MAGA, folks. This is MAGA married to Trump. Probably his actual wives as well.
Charlie?
What?
What would you like for dinner?
Yeah, what would you like for dinner? There we go. Well, let's take some of the questions. The Walrus says, is it live or not? Yes, this is live. We should have said live from Tennessee. It's the David Knight Show this morning on Memorial Day. It's not a recording. We did recordings last week, so on Friday, and we had some days that we had to take off the week before. So we are live today doing penance for taking some time off here. Fearless Rose in USA said, SAVE Act is actually a pledge to track your vote and to put you in the crosshairs if you don't like Big Brother. That's right. They're going to put you in this famed quantum tracking thing that Steve Pachenik made up. Well, they want to make that up. They want to make that for real, right? He wants to follow everybody here. AP Rumbleseed, according to Ellison, wet dream for pre-crime surveillance, it will include autonomous drones, which, of course, the elites will profit from. Yeah, the Trump family has already heavily positioned themselves into drones for the police state, drones for war. Epstein Island says, imagine Trump has exempted himself from paying any more taxes. Epstein Island, speaking of that, somebody asked Thomas Massey, they said, why don't, you haven't seen Miriam Adelson or whatever, some of these people, you haven't seen them at Epstein Island, have you? And he said, they probably got their own island somewhere else to do the same kind of stuff. Although it's a great comeback. Footstep 77, the people will trade for CBDC for no taxes from the tax mob. This will be the incentive. Wait for it. Yeah, it's there's a lot of different ways they're going to incentivize it. And of course, I think they're really not going to do CBDC. I think they're going to put it out there as a stable coin. It'll be run by the Trump crime family. You're going to have Jared Kushner, the Trump boys, the Witkoff boys. They're all going to be selling this stuff along with Howard Lutnick. They're going to sell you the stable coin. That is going to be used to prop up the dollar a little bit, but it'll primarily be used to control you in the same way that CBDC does. It can stop any processing just like that, just like a CBDC can. And it can track all the money that you do. So it has all of the police state features of CBDC, but it is privately owned. And you see, it's the same type of thing that they do with the flock cameras, for example. It would be something of a constitutional issue for the government to be putting cameras everywhere, surveilling people. They might get into some issues with that. But hey, if a corporation wants to put cameras in the public square, that's fine. I mean, you're not allowed to film ICE agents. But anybody else can be filmed in public spaces, right? And so if they want to put cameras in public spaces, that's fair game for anybody that wants to work with the government. It's just if you want to look at what the watchers are doing, you're not allowed to do that. They get to wear masks, they don't wear name tags, and you are not allowed to film them. Or they put you on their list, or they attack you, or they ram their car into you, or they kill you. That's the rules of the game. And so now you've got a situation with this massive, this cancer of flock cameras metastasizing all over the country. Now the FBI is openly saying, hey, we want to buy that data. There you go, right? That's the way this always happens. And it's the way, as I tried to explain to the MAGA people in 2020 about what Trump was doing to them in 2020. They said, no, it's not Trump who's doing it. It's the bad Democrat governors that are doing all this stuff. And I said, Trump is paying them to do it. He doesn't want to go directly against the 10th Amendment. So going back to the very first one of these germ war games, 2 months before 9/11, they did a dark winter simulation. Then they had 1 week after 9/11, they had the anthrax attack. 2 months later, they put out the model legislation for all the states to enact. And they did that so that the states would be the ones actually doing it, and it wouldn't be a 10th Amendment issue. They will simply bribe the states to do it. Here's a bunch of money. And they gave more money to Republican governors like Brad Little in Idaho. They gave him more money than the entire state budget. And it was all at his personal disposal. You don't think you can bribe a Republican governor under those circumstances? Well, it happened in 2020. We saw it over and over again. Some of the worst governors were people like Brad Little and DeWine in Ohio, who was working with Vivek the Snake Ramaswamy at the time. Patty Wax, when people think Trump will be gone soon, remember they kept obese Jabba the Kissinger alive until he was 100 years old. As a matter of fact, do we have that picture of Trump? I mean, he looks, I think I actually even put it in here as Jabba the Trump. And maybe you remember where you put it in there. I don't know.
Are you thinking of Trump exhausted?
No, that's not it. But let's see. We could show that one. Yeah, this one was one that somebody did.
What does that smell?
For him coming back from China. Yeah, that's right.
Change.
But there is a close-up of his face. I don't think I sent that to you.
You did.
I told you about it, and it's like really, really super close-up, and he looks horrible, and he does look like Jabba the Hutt, so we should call it Jabba the Trump, and we should move his lips and have him speak the tweets looking like that.
Sort of the opposite of only the good die young. It's only the really evil seem to linger on and on.
That's right. Yeah, that's the corollary. Yeah, AP Rumble seat. Seems like they did some beta tests in some small towns with surveillance cameras, and the Brits then took them down. Yeah, there's some resistance in Britain that is excellent, and we're going to talk about that when we come back. There's a guy who was interviewed by, I think it was Vox Populi was the outlet in the UK. They've had a lot of pushback in the UK against what is happening there. They see what's happening, and it's the same agenda that's happening here in America, folks. So we're going to play that in just a moment and give you what the guy had to say. It was excellent. I was truly amazed. I mean, he just went on and on, laid out everything, never said once like I just did. He was very articulate, and he knew exactly what was going on. And people are looking at Nigel Farage's Reform Party, and he has basically sold himself out, I think, when you look at this stuff. He literally went on to one of these sites. It's not OnlyFans where they do pornography, but it was something else where he would, you pay him $100 and he will say anything. It's a perfect metaphor for a politician, isn't it? So Nigel Farage, you give him money and you give him a little script and he'll say whatever you want to say, and you can have him leave the message for your answering machine or whatever you want him to say. And he would do it. He said some pretty amazing things for a little bit of cash, but again, that is what politicians do, isn't it? So
normally they charge a lot more.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, if he knows that you're Israeli, he'll jack the price up a little bit more because he knows that you've got a lot of American money that you've stolen. So anyway, he's basically sold himself out on a lot of different issues that are there. So they started another party called Restore, which really is holding the line on the issues. And we're going to play a clip for you when we come back. This particular guy. We'll be right back, folks.
You're listening to The David Knight Show.
Hear news now at apsradionews.com or get the APS Radio app and never miss another story.
What is the Iran war costing you? Well, the New York Times had a story, and they basically just focused on the cost of energy, which is, I thought, pretty narrowly focused here. Since the war with Iran broke out, the average American household has spent an extra $190 on gasoline. Well, hey, for a billionaire like Trump, that's just peanuts, isn't it? The equivalent of a month's electricity bill for most people, or a week's worth of groceries for a couple of people. Tell me about it. That's, I said, in the Miata, it's got such a small trunk, but I don't need a big trunk anymore. For the price of groceries, you can't really stock up on things. The gasoline calculation was done by Brown University, as we're looking at an average of $4.55 per gallon. That, folks, is simply the retail price of gasoline is simply the tip of the iceberg reality, because diesel has gone up much more, and it is more embedded into the price of everything than gasoline is, because whether you're talking about tractors or that are growing crops, or whether you're talking about semi-trailers that are transporting the finished products, that's diesel that you're talking about. And jet fuel has gone up even faster. So this is a very small, narrow focus to focus on the price of gas. People are spending less on essentials. More than 40% of people in a recent poll said they were spending less on groceries and medical care. Richer households are spending relatively small shares of their income on gas. 2.7%. Now, that's not the billionaires that we were talking about before that was exposed. I mean, for the billionaires, it literally is peanuts. And they have to tell their butler, don't worry about it, just put it on the credit card there when you fill it up. But it is literally peanuts. Did Trump ever have a budget for himself? Did he ever have a budget for his failed casino businesses? I seriously doubt it. Poorer households, however, are spending far more. They're spending 4.2% of their budgets. And again, the New York Times doesn't tell you what they consider to be a poorer household, what they consider to be a richer household. This is not the first time in recent years the economy has been shocked by war. Biden did that as well. After Russia invaded Ukraine, oil prices spiked because of Biden's sanctions. They don't say that. At its peak, the national average was $5.02 a gallon. See, the way the New York Times frames this, what happened to us back in 2022 was Russia's fault, not Biden's fault. The reality is it was Biden's response to what Russia did that was at fault. Didn't work. It just punished us. And so we're now rapidly approaching that $5.02 per gallon. Last month, the tomato cost 40% more than it did a year ago. Tariffs have forced prices up for many industries. Again, Trump began this as soon as he took office. He started raising prices using tariffs. It just takes a long time for it to show up. And it's taking a while for the oil prices to show up. It's gradually showing up, and he's talking it down periodically. But the reality is there. This is why when we look at things like the price of gold and silver, don't get caught up in what the current market price of something is. You look at what the real price is, and that's going to show itself over a period of time. That's why, one of the few things you can do about all this stuff is to get gold and silver. One of the few things you can do for yourself personally. And again, Tony Arterburn, Wise Wolf, you can get there through davidknight.gold. Inflation last month rose at the fastest pace in nearly 3 years. And gasoline was among the fastest rising categories. You know what the New York Times doesn't talk about here? The Pentagon budget. As I pointed out, we're looking at $11,100 on average for American households for just the Pentagon budget per year. You got an extra $11,000 sitting around your house. How would you like to have most of that money? Because most of that money is wasted. It's not spent on defending this country. We don't need to have a military that is bigger than the rest of the world combined. That's what they're aiming for. And they're pretty close to getting that. I mean, we're bigger than the next 8 countries in terms of defense spending. We have a bigger budget than the next 8 combined. This is ridiculous paranoia and fraud that we're looking at. This is not about defense of this country. And so Trump remains defiant as he's pushing ahead on politically unpopular ideas. I put up over the weekend, I said, so when do we stop calling him a populist president? When he is pushing unpopular ideas. He got elected pushing popular ideas that the populist people wanted him to push. But then when he comes in, he does exactly the opposite. And he becomes unpopular for doing exactly the opposite of these populist promises that he made. When does he cease to become a populist? His approval rating has hit a low, and again, it's the lowest point, according to the New York Times poll, lowest point he's had in the 2 administrations. He's weighing whether or not to restart a bombing campaign in an unpopular war against Iran. He's proposed a pair of deeply unpopular spending items. Yeah, that's putting it mildly. Again, such a fraudulent grift that even Jon Stewart said in a rant, he said, he's just trolling us. And this is so over the top. He's just trolling us. This is just about producing liberal tears. No, it's about making himself rich. Don't think that that may be what MAGA is all about. The only thing that MAGA cares about, even as Trump pushes us, he could push us into a nuclear war. And you would have these people on Twitter saying, look at that. Look at these liberal tears over nuclear war. Isn't that great? Trump is owning them. Yeah, well, politically powerful. He wants to present himself as all-powerful, basically. And that was why, some of the stuff happened with Massey, and he's taking a victory lap for that. But that was really done by the Zionists who didn't want to see somebody who would push back against the politicians that they owned. Don't want to see them succeed because that would damage them too much. But then, of course, he's also taking victory laps over what is going on with Stephen Colbert, who retired. He had his friends buy CBS, and they said, we're not going to renew his contract. And so he's been out there virtue signaling to people. So Trump put out a meme where he has Stephen Colbert signing off saying, this is our final show or whatever. Trump walks on stage from the wings, grabs him by the back of the coat, and throws him into a trash bin. And it looks like this. The
final broadcast, ladies and gentlemen.
What it looks like. And then the left did their little troll thing where he goes around, he throws Trump into the trash can. How about that? So now you got both the left and the right. You got one guy throwing the other guy in the trash can. Well, let me tell you what the reality is. And this is the other meme that came up with a shooting that was happening at the White House. You had a reporter who was caught live, and she's like, what is that? You can hear the gunfire going. She doesn't know what gunfire sounds like. She's like, what is that? She's looking around. That's become a meme, and there's a gazillion memes. It's her doing it with 9/11 in the background, the Twin Towers on fire, and what is that? And one of them with Biden snuggling up behind her, another one with Trump doing his YMCA dance, and it was endless. I mean, everybody was using this as a meme over the weekend. Well, here's one with Stephen Colbert, just to remind you that, folks, it was Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and it was Stephen Colbert who threw us into the dumpster with all this vaccine stuff. Remember that? What is that? It's disgusting. It's Stephen Colbert out there with a bunch of guys dressed up like, you would have rocket dancers, the bare, hairy legs, though. And they're all dressed up like syringes. And they're doing tequila. So when it stops and it would say tequila, they say, vaccine, He sold that poison to you. Trump produced that poison. And so now the two of them are throwing each other into the trash heap, which we can both applaud. And we can applaud both of that happening to both of them. But they're the ones who threw us into the dumpster with the lockdowns and with the bioweapon stuff. Well, I want to play for you a guy who really nailed it in the UK. It was a man on the street, and they walk up to this guy, and they got somebody who actually knew something instead of the typical idiot on the street. And it turns out that he's actually a writer. He has a Substack. His name is Frank Wright. One of the things that he put out was this picture, and it's an op-ed piece he's got here about MAGA-geddon, how the American dream is unmaking itself. I like this a lot. I think it's kind of a, Mount Grabmore, I guess. You've got Bill Cosby, P. Diddy, Jeffrey Epstein, and Donald Trump on a Mount Rushmore thing. A lot of people refer to that as Mount Rapemore. And again, when we look at what's happening, Thomas Massey has said, so many people putting up memes said, okay, so he's there for a few more months. It's May now. He doesn't get out until January of next year. So between now and then, he needs to stand up and use his immunity on the floor of Congress to name names. Many people are afraid to name names because they get sued by these billionaires. He can name names and he can release stuff. Just go back and look at the Pentagon Papers. And he's now saying he's going to do it.
Expect you to name more names in the coming weeks and months?
Yes. Todd Blanche is violating the law. There's still millions of files they haven't released. We know from talking to the victims' lawyers that their own 302 forms haven't been released. We know that files have been over-redacted. I have released at least 3 names of billionaires who are implicated in this. I don't think it's possible to get to convictions with Todd Blanche at the top and with the FBI director, Kash Patel, at the top, because they've effectively both perjured themselves by saying that there's nobody else in the files. Even Melania doesn't believe that. The First Lady knows that Jeffrey Epstein didn't act alone. And here's the great thing, Kristen. Whether I'm in Congress or not, the Epstein Files Transparency Act is a law, and it goes on for years. So if we can't get this Attorney General and this FBI Director to do the right thing, the next ones who take those seats are obligated by law to release the files that these individuals are not releasing now.
Yeah, and of course, the other aspect of this, he has said that we look at what they're so upset about. They're so upset about the fact that he worked with a Democrat to try to get transparency on the massive pedophile ring. Think about that. That is what MAGA is defending. It truly is amazing. And I've seen over and over again, and Trump has led this charge, attacking Massey because he worked with Ro Khanna on that. And Massey said, we did this bipartisan. It was the right thing to do. He said, this is the only bill since I've been there that got passed that wasn't run by lobbyists. There were no lobbyists pushing for this. And he said, we worked, Democrats and Republicans worked with this to get this pushed. It was the right thing to do. We weren't paid by lobbyists to do this. But MAGA and Trump are coming after that with a vengeance. So hopefully he'll do it. I just have to say, what are you waiting for? Do it now. I mean, don't say that, at some point in the future, I'm going to read these names. That's like putting a target on your back. If you don't want to get killed, do it now. So let's take a look at what's going on in the UK. We had massive protests last week. Look at these protests against the British government and what they're doing to destroy Britain. And they are working so hard to destroy them culturally, to destroy them demographically, to destroy them economically. And of course, that's happening in America as well. It's happening across Western civilization. And so the response, look at that. Here's another clip of another crowd here. It's massive numbers of people. And the response of the UK government was to start photographing these people and putting them in a database. And here it is right here. Look at that, how many of them there are. So there's a big pushback there. And so at a rally that was being run by, not Reform, but by Restore, again, Reform is pretty much selling out to this and backing off. You had a man on street interview where rather than taking his name and putting him in a police database to be surveilled, this was reported on the street, and it went viral. And here's what the person he interviewed is. His name is Frank Wright, and he has a Substack, and it's called Frank Writer, and his name is WRIGHT. His Substack is Frank Writer, WRIGHTER.com. And the article is MAGA-geddon, and we're going to talk a little bit about that when we come back. But I just wanted you to hear what he had to say because it was spot on. And as you hear this, think about what we know. He doesn't reference the fourth turning, as Strauss and Howe point out, this cyclical thing where people are so disgusted with the institutional corruption And it does become corrupted about once every 4 generations. People look at these institutions, they have a lifespan just like you and I have a lifespan. And after about 4 generations, people can see that these institutions that were created after the previous unrest and the previous turning are now no longer serving them. They are against them. And here's what Frank Wright had to say in his interview about why he was working with Restore in the UK.
What has persuaded you to come out today?
Well, we've driven up, my son and I, from Newbury, because obviously we can see the state of the nation and there's a national emergency, and we need to obviously think about the future. What kind of country are we going to have for our children? Or are we going to have a nation at all? Now, I'd rather live in a nation and not a market, not a borderless international supermarket browsed by mutually hostile strangers, not something that reduces us all to bargain hunters. We need to save the nation, and I think that Rupert Lowe's Restore Britain is the only credible vehicle to do that.
What was it that made you come over? What were the issues that pulled you to Restore, and what was the moment?
Well, you can see that there's obviously there's the bankruptcy of the general liberal idea. There's the fact that you get a sense that the Western idea and the ideas we've had since the Second World War are winding down themselves. And at the same time, you can't escape the fact that we appear to be morally as well as financially bankrupt across the West, across Europe and in Britain, that the whole system is in a form of crisis. If you like, what we used to call normal life has been replaced by a permanent state of emergency in terms of our social incohesion, in terms of demographic change, in terms of the fact that there appear to be no realistic solutions offered, and whoever you vote for, the same mad policies get continued throughout your life. And that's what I've seen the last 30 years. And if it goes on, we're finished.
Yep. So what does finished look like?
What does finished look like? Finished looks like an economic collapse. Finished looks like spending all your money on foreign wars when nothing works in the country. Finished looks like you can't get a job for being competent. There's no sanity even in recruitment. We have a competency crisis because for increasingly ideological and insane reasons, employment opportunities, even training opportunities are restricted. There's one news story after another about why, for political reasons, we're doing mad things that bankrupt the country, that basically park people's careers, that exclude talented people of genuine principle from any area of influence whatsoever. And taken collectively, this is the politics and economics of national suicide. So it has to stop. And there's increasingly a sense, not just in Britain, but throughout the West, that something has to change. And I think that's only going to build as we begin to see the devastating consequences of the latest round of reckless warmongering in the Middle East, which we should never have been involved in, but we're all going to have to live with those consequences. And from this summer on, we're going to see how bitter they are. And it's only going to get worse unless we change the system. And there's no real change that's offered by the parties of the forced consensus. That was the liberal establishment after the Second World War, and it doesn't work anymore, and it hasn't produced the utopia it's promised. It's produced a sort of hell on earth, from which there seems to be no way out. But there is. There are people of genuine principle and genuine talent in this country. And the reason why so many people despair of that is because I think they've been systematically excluded from positions of power, influence, and professional advantage for ideological reasons that has bankrupted the country. But we have enormous human capital here. We're just not permitted to release it, because if you don't have the correct views, you don't get the job, you don't get any promotion. In fact, you might be harassed off social media and find yourself debanked, or at least your career is stymied. So what we need is a realistic economy, some return of human dignity to every area of life. Because, as I said, it hasn't just financially bankrupted us, it's morally bankrupted us too. And we're looking at a state where you're going to live in a borderless international bazaar, a placelessness, if you like, an international nowhere land, where nothing means anything, nowhere seems like home, and where the essential value of human life is replaced with price, such as we see in awful things like surrogacy or 0 hours contracts, or the increasing degradation of, what you call a work-life balance. Finally, how many people actually do work? How many people are now dependent on the state, directly or indirectly, to the point where those people exceed the ability of the nation to actually make money? This is an economic doom spiral. And so the more that you look at the problem, the more you realise that really we are facing a national emergency. And if you are going to take on the duties of the state, something more than self-interest or printing money for your own political friends, we need to do better than that. We need to take seriously the depth of the crisis that we're in, and we need people of genuine principle and talent to address that. And I think we've found them under Rupert Lowe and in Restore Britain.
And so, do you believe that essentially it's the rhetoric of blood, sweat and tears that we need in this country?
No, I don't think we need any rhetoric at all. You see, that's partly the problem. For the last century, we've been ruled by the political technique of the liberal system, which is basically the rule by media. And what you do then is you use slogans and you use concepts and you attach people's hopes and dreams basically to messages for products that you're never going to deliver. That's how we're ruled. We are sold dreams. Our desires are stimulated by, if you like, the kind of ruling consensus. But none of these things ever happen. And instead what happens is what the elites want to happen. And so we get involved in these terrible economic doom spirals. We see the quality of our lives degraded as margins are shaved. Everything's subject to shrinkflation now. It's not just your chocolate bars that are getting smaller. It's the value of your wages. It's your ability to earn a living. It's the kind of job that you have to do so. Usually a kind of dignity-free environment, right, where you're slowly choked to death by the lanyard and its terms and conditions. So if we have just more empty rhetoric, we're not going to get anywhere. You need credible people of genuine integrity and experience and ability who are committed to some higher purpose than themselves, than their own personal enrichment or their own mad ideological faction. We need a sense of higher purpose to see beyond the predicament that the rule by media has delivered us into, because it's delivered us all into a fantasy world that's turned out to be a nightmare. And those adverts, if you like, for that system that Francis Fukuyama described as the end of history, the liberal system, he said, periodic elections plus cheap consumer goods. And that was the final verdict on the organisation of mankind, and we could never do any better. Well, it hasn't delivered, has it? The elections have delivered political paralysis in Britain and in France and in Germany, the major powers of Europe. And so what's that election
and in the US
doing? It's ground to a halt. And the economics of this, if you ask conservatives who basically market worshippers, if you sit next to them and say, look, you've destroyed our nation, replaced it with a series of light industrial sheds increasingly staffed by third world migrant labour, what has that conserved? It's demolished everything. Everything that they claim to believe in about Burke and his little platoons, about traditional communities and traditional values, has basically been suborned to market worship and pure profit. We need something more than money. We need something more than empty ideological slogans. We need real change for people's real lives, for a change. And I think the crisis that the West generally is facing, politically, diplomatically, morally, and financially, gives you the opportunity to make the kind of deep-rooted change that you need to save the nation.
Very wise words from Frank Wright. And again, his Substack is frankwriter.com. And he is a writer. He writes for a life site. And you heard him say, we need to have something other than just the pursuit of money, just the pursuit of markets. He said, people who have talent and principle or ability, they are driven out. And that is exactly the problem across Western world that we see here. But then he gets into the war itself, specifically what is happening with Iran. And that's what this op-ed piece is about. But I wanted to play a little bit more about this interview. This interview went on for like 7 minutes. And it was pure gold, folks. You need to find this and watch it again. But here's what he had to say about this idiotic Iran war.
And where is it you think that reform has fallen into, these traps are falling for this? Because obviously you've chosen Restore over Reform.
Yeah.
And you've already mentioned the Iran war. And they obviously want to back the Americans.
Well, this is a difficult question to approach if you're not the kind of sad person with no life like me who actually gets into this. But the Americans didn't choose that war freely on their own, did they? They've admitted severally, their own chief diplomat Marco Rubio and many others, the leader of the House and so on, have said that this was a war for Israel because Israel was going to launch that war. And so the real fundamental question is who basically rules the United States, because that war is definitely not in the national interest of the Americans. In fact, I personally predicted this along with others at the beginning of January. This has led to a strategic defeat of the United States. It's broken its military presence, its credibility. It's now seen as agreement incapable. That means in diplomacy, nobody believes your promises. So no one's going to make any deals with you because you constantly break them. And what's worse with that, you then assassinate the people that you were trying to make the agreements with in the first place. Incidentally, the Straits were open before you did this, and you killed the man who placed a religious prohibition on the development of nuclear weapons, you know? And then your big idea is to bomb everybody so they love you. I mean, this is insane. It doesn't make sense. There's no interest in the national interest at the political elite level in the West, whether it's in the United States or whether it's in Britain or whether it's in Europe. And that's the reason why these political parties are seeing themselves decline dramatically in popularity, because they're not delivering for their own people. The way that they rule is for the interests of the rulers, not the ruled. And you can see that there because these wars are mad. And it's not just the Iran war. These wars are mad from the point of view of the national interest of any Western nation, because it didn't deliver anything for them other than misery and chaos. And in fact, if you look into the history of regime change, not only did it come about because of Benjamin Netanyahu saying that he wanted the West to replace diplomacy with a war on terror from 1979, but when it went on to do this, what did it produce? The reason we have a mass migration crisis in Europe is because of the wars in the Middle East that the United States has wholeheartedly fought, which serves only the grand strategy of the Israelis. That's the reason why you had millions of people come into Europe in 2015 from Syria. That's the reason why, as Colonel Gaddafi predicted in 2010, he went on French television and said, if you kill me, Europe will turn black. And then in Operation Odyssey Dawn, when they did kill him, when Hillary Clinton and David Cameron killed Gaddafi, rather brutally, Europe did turn black because Libya was a gateway that wasn't open then. And so was Syria. And then so was Iraq. And so when you smash these countries, what happens? People flee and routes are established, and that becomes a business. Mass migration is a criminal enterprise. It's a racket. People pay thousands of dollars to be shipped into your country. This becomes a parallel economy. It's part of the corrupting influence of the business of mass destruction itself. And when people are beginning to see that now, because they're seeing that it's going to make changes in their pocket, the price of their petrol, the availability of their food through the scarcity of fertilizer, the cost of living is going to go up. Governments like the Labour Party, and probably like Reform, are going to borrow more in order to defray those costs, which will further devalue the value of your money, making it harder and harder to survive. It's a death spiral. Fundamentally, the decades of regime change wars that I've seen have changed one regime more than most, and that's our own. Because I remember when we used to live in a sane, functioning, stable, and relatively happy country. And now it's terrible. And all these policies have been undertaken which have created this nightmare. And it's the political consensus that was formed after 1945 that's done this to us. And the reason why none of these parties have any answers to these problems is because they are the problem and not the solution. And if they ever name the fact that it's their policies that have caused this, they're finished. And I think reality's making that argument now, and they know they're finished. And this is why you see the elites in the United States cashing out through a series of well-documented financial trades timed to statements always made on Fridays just before the markets closed, like we saw yesterday, saying that peace is coming. This is so bad that the Federal Securities Commission is investigating the President of the United States and is in a circle for insider trading now, because it's obvious. So you're ruled by something that looks very much like a fanatical crime syndicate that does things that destroys everyone's lives, makes these wonderful promises to them, whether from the left or the right. But in the end, what you get is chaos and war and open borders and mad slogans and the outright denial of reality. And it's not good enough because we have to live in the mess they made.
What's the Twitter for Frank?
Yeah, the Twitter is Frank Reiter, R-I-G-H-T-E-R, Frank Reiter. And inevitably, depressingly, I have a Substack. And I do videos for LifeSite News.
That guy is spot on. I like Frank Reiter. Frank Wright, actually. Reiter is what he has on Twitter and on Substack. And he wrote this article here, Magageddon. And again, when we talk about the wars in various areas driving the mass migration into Europe, the UK, as well as the United States, just take a look at Venezuela, our great triumph, according to Trump, right? He wants to make Venezuela the 51st state. It wasn't that long ago that they were concerned about Venezuelan migrants who were coming here as swatters. Remember the guy that allegedly worked for Venezuelan intelligence service? I mean, we've got a lot of Marxists there who hate this country, who hate everything that America is about. Of course, there's other people from Venezuela who don't, but nevertheless, you want to pull all those people in and make them the 51st state? This is what Trump wants to do. So, yeah, it is a death spiral. He is absolutely right about that. The only question is it murder or suicide as this is happening? He said what the strategic defeat of the U.S. and Israel and Iran means, showing that the post-9/11 vision for U.S. global domination led to another impossible dream, to make America great again using military power. And as he points out, whenever you look at empires who decide they're going to use military power to make themselves great, it never is able to be sustained. He says it's just a matter of time before the profound financial, military, and economic shocks produced by Trump's war for Israel will be felt in the United States. Again, they're hoping that I think that this is going to happen after the election. When you start to make these kinds of massive changes, what happens when we've got something that's really massive? You know, like the Titanic or something large like that. It's got a lot of inertia. It takes a great deal of time to get it started, but once it's started on a course, it's difficult to change course, sometimes impossible to change course in time. That's what happened to the Titanic. And what we have right now is a Titanic disaster from the Trump administration. Whether you're talking about tariffs and economics, that tariff, that Titanic trajectory that we're on towards the iceberg, or whether you're talking about what's going on with Iran and the military and economic consequences of that. In both cases, it's this massive ship estate that has a tremendous amount of inertia and cannot steer away from the iceberg in time. And I should mention, sorry that we lost power there. For something happened here to glitch it, and we're saying we've got to get a whole slew of UPSs to try to stop that, because we got power plugged into a lot of different disjointed places, not just one. So we need to get a lot of other UPS systems here so we can weather that. But it was just a temporary glitch. That's what happened to the broadcast there. We'll piece that together for people who want to watch it in repetition when it's not live. But he goes on to say, this looks like the end of the world as Americans knew it. The impact of this war, this is one that is not a case of viewing explosions in some distant desert. And again, this has been the American experience for these wars. We saw it with Desert Storm and all the rest of the stuff. We just watch vicariously like it's some kind of a video game. We don't think about the people that are involved in it. Of course, in the Gulf War, it was against a military that was there. Now what we're doing is we're watching very callously as civilian populations are being destroyed. We just had a massive event in Russia where they attacked, the Ukrainians attacked a school, killed a very small percentage of people compared to just one of the attacks against schools on the opening salvo of the Iranian war. Killed 21 kids, which is 21 too many. Quite a few were injured. There may be more casualties than that. The response from the Russians was that we cannot negotiate with these people. We're getting to that point. I mean, that's what he was talking about, what Frank Wright was talking about when he said the United States has gotten to the point where, just like Israel, they can't be trusted to keep their agreements. They can't be trusted to negotiate in good faith. They can't be trusted to not sneak attack you while they're negotiating with you. They can't be trusted not to try to assassinate the negotiators who are there. And so when you get to that point, what's left? You just have a perpetual war. That's what the Middle East has been for a long time. Now we are adopting the strategies of Israel in terms of fighting that war. And what we're creating is a kind of Hatfields versus McCoy blood feud that's just going to go on without end when you go down that path. And so what happened is we had a retaliation in Iran from the Russians for these schools, And it was horrific what happened. This kind of stuff, folks, can happen to us in America. Look at these things coming down. This is missiles coming down. Listen to this. They're hitting. And if you count where they hit and the amount of time it takes for the sound to get there, they may be about 9 or 10 miles away. And here they are. You can hear them finally. This is the consequences of it, folks. This is what happens when you have wars. Now, so far we have been shielded against this, but there's absolutely no reason to think that America is not going to be attacked by the kind of asymmetric warfare with drones that we have seen happening back and forth between Ukraine and Russia against infrastructure, against civilian populations. This has now become standard to attack civilians. Look at this one. This is continuing on the next day. It's really amazing. You just say them, boom, and it's comes in. This is, they think it's Oreshnik missiles that are coming in, for which they have absolutely no defense. And we have no defense for our military bases. Colonel McGregor was on an interview, and the guy pulled up a map, and he showed all of these military bases that we have put in over the decades surrounding Iran. And he goes, which of these military bases are still viable? And Colonel McGregor said, well, none of them are. They've all been attacked. We've had the central nervous system, if you will, of the anti-missile defense system was taken out at the very beginning of this. It was so bad, of course, and it's been reported now by multiple sources that in some of these bases they had to remove the American military personnel, put them in hotels because they couldn't defend the base. And that's what Colonel McGregor was saying. He said the warfare has changed now so that you can't protect these bases. Think about that. The rapidly changing tactics of warfare have changed so quickly that military bases that are forward positioned like that have become something of a liability. It's kind of like the battleship that no longer really functions, and that happened in World War II. The battleships that had been so important up to that point in time were no more important. It was the aircraft carriers that were important. Well, now all of these types of things are changing very, very rapidly. They're changing the calculus of military power and how wars are fought, even to the extent that military bases abroad are a liability and not a way to project power. And so he says the impact of this war is going to be one of not viewing these explosions in a distant desert. The war is a tremendous mistake, which is unintentionally delivering what MAGA promised to do, to permanently resize and to rebalance U.S. commitments and grand strategy. Yeah, if these people who lust for power can't voluntarily shut down this American empire, it'll be shut down as all empires have been shut down in the past. It'll be shut down by its own overreach. The Greek word apocalypse means something that is uncovering or a revelation. So something that was hidden, a mystery or whatever, and now it is being revealed, right? That's why we look at the last book of the New Testament. They call it, it's not the revelation or the apocalypse about the end of the world. That's the way it's treated by a lot of people who look at it in the same way that they would consult the Witch of Endor on divination. No, it was actually, the title was The Revelation of Jesus Christ. That's what Revelation is really about. It's not about Israel. It's about Jesus Christ. But again, we see this theology that has poisoned American Christianity, this dispensationalism that treats the end of the world as being all about Israel and not about the summation of history in the Lord Jesus Christ. He is the summation of the Old Testament. He is the summation of the prophecies. He is the summation of the end of time. But we look at it from the wrong position, even calling it revelations, multiple, right? Because there's going to be a lot of different revelations about things that are going to happen at the end of the world. No, that's the wrong way to read it. It's about revealing Christ from different perspectives. After months of obvious lies from the White House about the reasons for this war, its conduct, its losses, its consequences, it's hard to fathom where the big lie began. Perhaps it began with the noble lie of MAGA itself. Liberal democracy is the marketing of the elite agenda to the masses through the mobilization of popular sentiment. That's why when somebody said, well, if all these elections are rigged, why do they bother to do them at all? Well, again, at some level, there is competition. And that exists there at a level in the same way that you had the intelligence agencies in the late 1990s as switching circuitry advanced and the internet as we know it today started to come to fruition. Again, it had been talked about since the early 1960s by DARPA psychologist J.C.R. Licklider. So they had this idea of what they wanted to do. They didn't have the technology. As the technology began to come online, they set up their own venture capital firm, Incutel, by the CIA. They also put all these different people from the CIA, NSA, and all these intelligence agencies, they put them on the board of directors. How do you think these corporations operated for decades, losing money? That's how. They were underwritten by the government. They, however, picked who the competitors were going to be and then said to them, all right, now you compete amongst yourself because we want the strongest ones to win. But they made sure that the only certain people were allowed to participate in it. That's the way the elections are set up. And as they turn these elections into selections, they want to use it also to build a consensus. See, you all voted for this. It may be that you've got a record turnout of 20% of the people who showed up for your primary. But hey, I've got a mandate now because I got more than 50% of the 20% of the people who showed up. So I got 10% of the people who allegedly voted for me, whether that's real or not, whether that's based on any real information or whether it's based on lies and propaganda, whether it's based on actual votes or padding of votes, whatever the purpose. Now I've got, let's say 10.5% of the people who live here have put me in. And now I get to rule like a dictator. Well, that's what liberal democracy has become. He said, MAGA was the sale of Trumpian populism on promises of national renewal and restoration of America's greatness. This was a sales pitch. An initially impressive team of strategists put together a new realism to produce what J.D. Vance called a foreign policy for the American middle class. A new era was promised of realism and restraint. Because we all know how these foreign wars are destroying this country. So, what was the solution? Well, they promised restraint. What have we seen from Trump? We have seen the most in-your-face, adventurous administration in terms of one war after the other that I've ever seen in my lifetime. I mean, he's not even finished with his failed war with Iran while they are talking about how they're going to go to Cuba next. I guess they figure they can have an easy victory there to erase the memory, the bitter taste of this Iranian war. This was a tacit acceptance that the U.S. had not won and could not win in the world and admitted the regime change era had ruined America. MAGA really came from the recognition that the U.S. had bankrupted itself both financially and morally and following a grand strategy aimed at becoming and remaining the only global power. This vision materialized in the 1989 fall of the Berlin Wall and was presented in a Rand paper a year later. And, supposedly the end of history and so forth. And this vision, the regime change wars for Israel and Libya and the Middle East, made strategic and even financial sense, as did the attempt to overextend and unbalance Russia with the war in Ukraine. Victory would gift the West the boon of massive mineral resources to defray the mortgage that it had taken out to secure them. And again, this is, you see Trump openly talking about this. Well, take the oil. Take the oil from Syria. Take the oil from Venezuela. I mean, he literally has called himself a pirate because he is. He understands what he's doing. It's MAGA. They're the only ones who don't see this. And so they're still selling this lie. MAGA media is using this lie that, hey, we get the oil, as trying to present what is going on in Iran and Venezuela as a victory. Hey, if we blow up the world's oil supply in the Middle East, that'd be great for us because we still have our oil. It's insane. We have been trained to distrust the obvious and to disregard reality. So it always comes as a shock to be confronted by what in place of what we've been led to believe ought to be there instead. The Soviet Union was the number one military power in the world. What happened to them? I remember when all this stuff happened, and we had conservatives at the time who said, well, that's just it. It was a centrally planned, controlled economy. They were not focused on helping their people. They were not focused on economic growth because they were not focused on freedom. You try to centrally plan and centrally control an economy, and it's going to turn out this way. And yet now we have conservatives out there who, when Trump starts doing this, when he starts acting like China, well, that's great. We got to be like China in order to beat China. You have to beat the monster in order we have to become the monster in order to defeat the monster. That is not true. America has always been able to survive because we had freedom, because we had a free market. The path to prosperity, the path to a strong nation, is done by a nation of shopkeepers, a nation of small businesses, a nation where somebody can have an idea and they have the freedom to be able to do it instead of having government regulators keeping their boot on your throat. But of course, that's not the position of conservatives today. The position of conservatives today is that the government should take a controlling interest in Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation, TSMC, or in Intel, or maybe even in NVIDIA. And we should be partners with them, and we should make money with them. This is the Chinese fascist communist model, and this is what Trump is adopting. This is what destroyed the Soviet Union. When you are focused on guns and not butter, and of course the government can't produce anything. This is why Gerald Celente always says, the business of China is business, the business of America is the military. That was what the Soviet Union did. That's what led to their defeat. Frank Wright is absolutely right about this, and so is Gerald Celente. By the way, use the code NIGHT at Trends Journal to save 10% on Gerald Celente's trends. He's another one who understands where this came from and where it is going. Thank you for joining us on this Memorial Day. Have a good holiday. The Common Man. They created Common Core to dumb down our children. They created Common Pass to track and control us. Their Commons Project to make sure the commoners own nothing. And the communist future. They see the common man as simple, unsophisticated, ordinary. But each of us has worth and dignity, created in the image of God. That is what we have in common. That is what they want to take away. Their most powerful weapons are isolation, deception, intimidation. They desire to know everything about us while they hide everything from us. It's time to turn that around and expose what they want to hide. Please share the information and links you'll find at thedavidknightshow.com. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. If you can't support us financially, please keep us in your prayers. thedavidknightshow.com.